I'm Nora Hale. I was 34 the week my grandfather's whole life got handed to the one man who never earned a page of it. Grandpa Henry died on a Tuesday. By Friday, my father stood on the porch, smiled at the family, and told me I would inherit dust. He made one mistake. He forgot who kept the books. And the night after the funeral, a stranger knocked on my door with an envelope and told me it was time to stop being quiet. Welcome back to Twisted Family Revenge Stories. This is where the quiet ones finally get heard. Where cruel people get answered with calm. Where shame gets met with the truth. If that sounds like your kind of story, stay with me. Because this started with a funeral. And ended in a courtroom where my father finally said too much. Before any of that, there was a brass bell on a wooden counter. There was grain dust in the air so thick you could taste it. There were muddy boots by the door. And there was Hale Brothers feed and grain sitting at the edge of our little Ohio town like it had always been there. I grew up behind that counter. I was 9 the first time Grandpa Henry let me ring up a sale. I was 11 when he slid the green ledger toward me, handed me a ballpoint pen, and said, "These numbers are yours to keep." My grandfather had hands like old work gloves. Big. Rough. Steady. His memory was even better than his hands. But he trusted ink more than either one. Every sack of feed. Every account. Every dollar owed. Every late payment. Every promise. It all went into that ledger in my small, careful handwriting. He would stand over me while I wrote. Not to correct me. To watch me get it right. Half the county owed Grandpa money at one time or another. He never chased people. Never begged. Never knocked on doors. But somehow he always knew the number down to the penny. One day I asked him, "If you already remember all of it, why do you still write it down?" He set his coffee on the counter. Looked at me for a long second. Then said, "The books don't lie, Nora. People do." I was a kid. I thought that was just something old men say when they want to sound wise. So I nodded. And I kept writing. Line after line. Season after season. While my father stayed up at the house. And my uncle drifted off to the city and barely looked back. For 23 years, that bell rang. I knew every sound the store made. The soft scrape of boots. The slide of feed bags. The thump of the old fridge door. The little cough the register gave before it opened. It was home. Then Grandpa got sick in the spring. The store went quieter. The ledger went into a drawer. And by late September, Henry Hale was gone. 3 days later, the bell rang for a stranger I didn't know. And after that, my family was never the same. The funeral was small. The casseroles were not. Half the county came through the church basement because Grandpa had carried half the county on credit at some point in his life. My father, Victor, worked that room like a man running for office. He shook hands. Held elbows. Dropped his voice at all the right moments. Accepted every condolence like it belonged to him. And somewhere between the potato salad and the coffee urn, he started using one word over and over. Estate. Not our family's estate. Not Henry's estate. Just estate. Like it already belonged in his pocket. At first, I did not think too much of it. Grief makes people grab at things. But the next morning, he already had the keys to the home place. Already had a lawyer's card in his shirt pocket. Already had a tone in his voice that made my skin pull tight. I found him standing in Grandpa's kitchen. He had one hand around a coffee mug. The fridge hummed behind him. I asked the plainest question in the world. "When do we read the will?" He didn't look up. "There is no will," he said. "Dad never made one." The floor seemed to shift under me. Because I knew that was false. 6 years earlier, Grandpa asked me to drive him to the county seat. A lawyer named Leonard Pike had an office there. I sat in the waiting room with a stale magazine. And through the glass, I watched Grandpa sign a thick stack of papers while a gray-haired woman stamped every page. When he came out, he folded his glasses, smiled, and said he had finally put his house in order. So I looked at my father in that kitchen and said, I drove him there. I saw him sign it. Victor set his cup down very slowly. His jaw moved once. Then he said, memory plays tricks on grieving girls. And he walked out. The screen door slammed behind him. It sounded like a verdict. Everything came to a head that Friday. The burial was over. Some cousins were still around. Neighbors too. My father gathered people on the porch of the home place the way Grandpa used to gather them for hog roasts and summer suppers. Only Grandpa gathered people to feed them. My father gathered them to perform. He stood on the top step where Grandpa always stood. Hands in his pockets. Voice loud enough for the yard. He announced that since there was no will, he would be filing as administrator of the estate. He said the law made him the man in charge now. The store. The house. The land. Every acre Henry Hale ever turned. Then his eyes found me at the bottom of the steps. And his mouth curled in that familiar way I had seen all my life. You won't get a single cent, he said. Then, louder, Mason's the next heir. Mason was my younger brother. He looked down at his shoes. A couple people gave those weak little laughs people give when they're nervous and want to be on the winning side. My face burned. But I didn't shout. I didn't cry. That surprised them. I think they were waiting for me to break open so they could call me dramatic and move on. Instead, I just nodded. Like he had told me the weather. Then I climbed those steps. Walked past him. Went through the front door I had walked through 10,000 times. The screen door clicked shut behind me. Soft. Clean. Like a lock. I got my purse off the hall table. I drove the 9 miles back to my apartment in town. And I did the one thing I have always done when I am scared. I started writing everything down. Here is the thing nobody in my family ever understood about me. They thought quiet meant agreeing. For as long as I can remember, I was the one who handled the hard paper. When my mother died, I filed the forms. When Mason totaled his truck at 19, I handled the insurance. When the store needed sales tax papers done, I drove out on Sundays and took care of it for free. I told myself I did it out of love. And mostly, I did. But somewhere along the way, my doing things quietly became everybody's favorite excuse. Nora handles things. Nora doesn't make a fuss. Nora will deal with it. That became the family gospel. So when my father told the whole porch I would get nothing, part of him truly believed I would just absorb it. Smile tight. Go home. Be useful again. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, I finally saw the cost of that. I had spent my whole life keeping everybody else's books. And never once put myself in the ledger. I work as a paralegal now. Probate and estates, of all things. Every day, I help strangers get through exactly the kind of mess my father was trying to build. And I had been so busy being the good daughter that I almost forgot I knew how this machine worked. Administrators do not simply keep everything. There are rules. There are duties. There are filings. There are judges who can force truth into daylight. I poured another cup of coffee I did not need. Pulled out a yellow legal pad. And at the top, I wrote the way Grandpa taught me to start any account that did not yet make sense. Questions. Under it, I wrote the first one. If there is no will, why is my father acting like he owns everything instead of just managing it? Monday on my lunch break, I did what I tell nervous clients to do. I went to the source. Probate filings are public record. So I drove to the county courthouse and pulled the file my father had opened. It was all there. Black ink. Plain language. Victor Hale petitioning for appointment as administrator of the intestate estate of Henry J. Hale. His attorney was Simon Creed. A name I knew from the wrong side of a few firm files. The petition listed the assets like groceries. The store, valued suspiciously low. 200 acres and 3 parcels. The home place. Then it listed the heirs at law. That was the part that made my stomach turn. Under our state's intestate succession rules, with Grandpa leaving no living spouse and only one living child, everything passed to Victor. Not divided. Not shared. To him. Mason and I were grandchildren. But the law does not let grandchildren reach around a living parent and inherit from a grandparent. Our mother had married into the family. Nothing flowed through her line. That meant something ugly. If there really was no will, my father was telling the truth about the law. The porch had not just been cruelty. It had been legal truth. Mason would get nothing. I would get nothing. Not then. Not later. Not ever. So the law was not my father's mistake. It was his cover. Either Grandpa really died with no will. Or someone needed us all to believe he had. I copied every page. Sat in my car in the courthouse lot. Read the file twice. Simon Creed had moved fast. Too fast for a family still grieving. He had asked that Victor be appointed sole administrator with full authority and very little court supervision. Independent administration. Less oversight. Less paper. Less daylight between my father and Grandpa's life. I closed the folder and stared through the windshield. Administrators don't get to keep everything, I said out loud. So why is he acting like he can? I did not go pound on my father's door. That is not how you fight someone who already has the keys. You make him write things down. As an heir at law, I had the right to ask for information. So I drafted a formal letter to Simon Creed. Short. Polite. Dated. Certified mail. I asked for a full inventory of estate assets and an accounting of any transactions since my grandfather's death. I kept a copy. I was not accusing anyone of anything yet. I was just turning on the lights. When I dropped that letter into the mail slot, my hands shook. Grandpa had been dead less than 2 weeks. Part of me whispered that a good daughter would wait. That a loving family would grieve first. But 7 years in probate taught me something hard. The damage is usually done in the quiet first weeks after a death. While everybody is too sad and too polite to look. The answer came 4 days later. It was not an inventory. It was a warning. On Simon Creed's letterhead, in smooth lawyer language, he wrote that my inquiries were causing distress to a grieving family. That the estate was in its earliest stage. That further harassment would be documented. No numbers. No list. No accounting. Just a velvet-covered threat. I read it twice. And something cold settled in my chest. The feeling I get right before I understand a case. People with nothing to hide give you the inventory. People who stall are hiding the inventory. The only question now was what? Mason came to my apartment that weekend. For a second, I barely recognized him. He was 29. 4 years younger than me. He had always been the easy one. Charming. Restless. Always one idea away from getting rich. He had poured his savings into a landscaping business that failed. Now he had a newborn baby, a stack of bills, and the face of a man who had not slept in days. He stood in my doorway holding a grocery store pie like some kind of peace offering. "Dad says you're going to drag Grandpa's name through court," he said. I let him in. Cut the pie. Asked how the baby was sleeping. He softened for just a second. Then caught himself like that softness had broken his orders. He had clearly been sent. He said Dad was only trying to keep the business in the family. Said I was being ungrateful. Said Grandpa would have wanted a man running things. He used our father's words in our father's rhythm. And I realized my brother had become a tape recorder for a man who was only kind when he needed something. I did not take the bait. I slid the courthouse papers across the table and asked one question. Did you read what you signed, Mason? His fork stopped in the air. He blinked once. Looked at the papers. Then back at me. What do you mean? I tapped the line on the petition. His signature was right there. He had agreed to support Victor's appointment. He had waived his own right to object. His face lost all color. He didn't know. My father had walked his exhausted, scared son through a stack of papers, and Mason signed where the pen pointed. That was the moment I stopped being only angry and started being careful. After that, the refusals came in a pattern. And the pattern told me more than any answer. I wrote again. This time I cited the exact statute that gave heirs the right to an accounting. Simon answered that it was premature. I asked for the inventory filing date. He said the estate's affairs were complex. Every letter was polite. Every letter said nothing. That is its own kind of confession. An administrator has a fiduciary duty. That is not a soft phrase. It means my father was legally bound to act honestly. To protect the estate. To inform the heirs. To turn over an accounting when asked. Stonewalling is not something a clean man needs. So while Simon ran out the clock, I started building something only I could build. I reconstructed the store's finances from memory. And from old papers I still had from doing the books over the years. 23 years of numbers lived in my head whether I wanted them to or not. I knew what the store usually cleared. I knew what the land leased for. I knew roughly what Grandpa kept in his accounts at the bank on Main Street. I built a shadow ledger. Line by line. What the estate should have looked like. Then I held it next to the little scraps my father had let fall on the porch. Talk of debts. A struggling store. Barely enough money to bury Grandpa properly. The numbers did not come close to touching. Not even close. One picture showed a near-empty estate. The other showed something solid. One of those pictures was false. And I knew which man in the family lied for a living. So I underlined the gap on my legal pad and wrote the next question. Where did it go? To answer that, I needed records. And I had one set of records my father could not yank away from me. When Grandpa got sick, I had brought home a folder of old receipts and bank slips to help square his last tax filing. They had been sitting in my hall closet the whole time. I spread them out on my kitchen table on a Sunday. And there it was. The thing that doesn't lie. Among the slips were 2 land transfers I had never entered. Dated 4 months before Grandpa died. Right in the middle of his illness. 2 of the 3 land parcels had quietly been deeded from Nora Hale to a limited liability company I had never heard of. Creekline Holdings. The sale price was laughable. A fraction of what that land was worth. I knew that ground. I had heard men bid more for a single acre. Then I looked at the signature. The one meant to be Grandpa's. And my whole kitchen went still. I had known Nora Hale's signature for 23 years. I could spot it from across a desk. This one was careful. Close. Good enough to fool most people. But the line was wrong. Grandpa made a heavy downstroke on the H. Always. Learned it that way in the 50s and never changed. This H was timid. And the hand was too steady. By then his real signature shook from the medicine. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, Grandpa's hand never looked like that. Then I grabbed my phone and searched the state business registry. If Creekline Holdings was real, somebody owned it. Before I could chase that all the way down, my father changed tactics. The threats had not moved me. So he tried sugar. He called on a Wednesday evening. Voice warm as a stove. Calling me kiddo for the first time in years. He said the family was being torn apart. That Grandpa would be heartbroken to see us fighting. Then he got to the point. He wanted me to sign a family settlement agreement. 1 page. Simple. I would waive any claim. We would keep things peaceful. Just sign it, he said. Let's put this ugliness behind us. As he talked, I could hear Denise, his wife, in the background coaching him. Then she took the phone. Think about Mason's baby, she said softly. Do you really want to take food off a newborn's plate over pride? That is how they do it. They never say, give me the money. They say, you are hurting a child by asking a question. Blackmail dressed up like conscience. A year earlier, maybe that would have worked on me. But I had spent 7 years watching grieving families get played in my office. I knew the move. And I knew the answer. You don't refuse too early. You buy time. So I made my voice as warm as theirs. I said I understood. I said I would read it carefully. Because I read everything carefully. That's just how I'm built, I told him. He liked that. He thought my caution was weakness. Same as always. We hung up sounding almost friendly. Then I set that unsigned page on my table next to the forged land transfer. And for 1 second, I let myself feel the cold little satisfaction of a man underestimating exactly the wrong woman. The fake deed and the empty inventory pointed one way. But to win, I needed the will. And the will was a ghost. I remembered the lawyer. Leonard Pike. The office in the county seat. The gray-haired woman who had stamped each page. So on a gray Saturday, I drove the 40 minutes out there with my legal pad on the passenger seat. The office was gone. The brick storefront sat empty. A for lease sign in the window. Dead flies along the inside glass. I called the realtor number from the curb. Leonard Pike had died 2 years earlier. The practice closed. The files had supposedly been returned or transferred. Supposedly. Nobody knew where Grandpa's file went. I tried the County Bar Association. The records office. Old numbers. New numbers. Voicemail after voicemail. Every door I knocked on had already been shut before I got there. Sitting in my car outside that empty office, I felt the case slipping through my fingers. Without the original will, I had a forged deed. A stalling father. And a strong suspicion. Suspicion does not win in probate court. The law has a cruel little rule for this exact thing. If a will was last known to be in the person's possession and can't be found after death, the court assumes they destroyed it themselves. That they revoked it. That the missing will means no will. My father would not even have to admit he burned it. The law would do the lying for him. I drove home in the dark. For the first time, I felt defeated. I kept thinking the same thing. I need one real fact. One hard fact. When I pulled into my apartment lot, a woman was standing under the light by my door. Waiting. She looked around 70. Sensible coat. Straight posture. The kind a woman gets from decades behind a desk. She did not look dangerous. She looked patient. Like she had decided to wait all night if needed. I got out of the car slowly. My keys laced between my fingers. The way my mother taught me when I was young. Are you Nora? She asked. Henry Hale's granddaughter. The one who kept his books. That made me stop. She knew about the books. I told her yes. She said her name was Martha Keene. For 31 years, she had been Leonard Pike's secretary and notary. The gray-haired woman. The one who stamped Grandpa's will while I sat with a magazine in the waiting room 6 years earlier. She said she saw Henry's obituary. Then later saw the probate notice in the county paper. The one saying his estate was being handled as though he died without a will. She said she had lain awake 3 nights because she knew that was false. She had watched him sign one. Stamped it herself. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I asked why she was telling me. Why not the court? She said, because the court didn't ask. And some things need to be carried to the right person by hand. Then she looked at me with those calm old eyes. Eyes that had watched 1,000 people sign their last wishes. And watched some of those wishes get stolen. It's time to tell them who you really are, she said. Then she pulled a plain envelope from her coat and handed it to me under that cold parking lot light. I did not open it outside. I knew once I did, nothing would ever go back. So I brought her inside. Made coffee with shaking hands. Sat her at my kitchen table. Then I opened it. 3 things slid out. The first was a photocopy. A conformed copy of the last will and testament of Henry J. Hale. Dated 6 years earlier. Every page initialed. Every signature clean. I read it once. Then again. My grandfather had not made one heir king. He left the store and the home place jointly to Mason and me. The 2 grandchildren who had carried his name and his work. Victor got a fair cash share. Not nothing. A son's portion. But not the crown. The second paper was a photocopy from Martha's notary journal. The entry showed the date. The document. Grandpa's signature. Her stamp. The third thing was an index card with a name and an old phone number written in faded ink. Frank Dolan. The second witness. An old store hand who signed beside Martha that day. I sat there holding proof that my grandfather had written me into his life. And finally understood what Martha meant. It is time to tell them who you really are. For one wild second, I had thought she meant blood. Some secret. Some buried family twist. But it was simpler than that. And bigger. I was the one Grandpa trusted with truth. The keeper of the books. That was who I really was. And I had let them tell me I was no one. But Martha was not finished. What she said next dropped the weight right back in my lap. A copy isn't the will, honey, she said gently. The law will assume he tore up the real one. You'll have to prove he didn't. I can't do that for you. You keep the books, so keep them. After she left, I did not sleep. I sat with my legal pad and turned the problem the way Grandpa taught me to turn a ledger that would not balance. The copy was a key. Not the door. To get Grandpa's real will admitted, I would have to petition the probate court for a lost or destroyed will. And that meant proving 3 hard things. First, that the will had been properly signed. That meant Martha and Frank alive and willing to testify. Second, the contents. The conformed copy helped there. Third, and worst of all, I had to beat the presumption that Grandpa destroyed the original himself. I had to prove somebody else had access to it. And motive to make it disappear. I wrote names in a column. Martha. Execution. Frank. Execution and contents. Creekline Holdings. Motive. Then I stared at the empty line beneath them. Access. That was the missing piece. I did not have it yet. And without it, I had a story. Not a case. I underlined Frank Dolan's name 3 times. He was old. His number was faded. He was the easiest piece to lose. So I started with him. The number was dead, of course. So I did what paralegals do. The boring work. The unglamorous work. Public records. Old addresses. A cousin of a cousin. One person who remembered Frank had moved to be near his daughter. Indiana first. Then Illinois. It took me 9 days. And a tank of gas. I drove out after work on a Friday and found him in a tidy little ranch house with a wind chime and a flag out front. Frank Dolan was 81. Sharp eyes. Slow knees. The moment I said the name Hale, he got wary. I'm not getting pulled into family trouble, he said with one hand still on the screen door. I did not push. Grandpa taught me not to push stubborn men. You set truth in front of them and let them pick it up. So I held up the copy of the will. Then Martha's notary page. And asked only, do you remember signing this? His eyes changed. He took the papers. Sat down right there on the porch chair. Read slowly. Then looked up with water in his eyes. I remember the day, he said. Henry bought us lunch after. Then he smiled a little. He said something too. About you. My throat tightened. What did he say? Frank pointed toward the yard like he could still see that long-ago parking lot. You were waiting outside. He pointed at the car and said, that one out there? Nora keeps the real books. He said it like it was the proudest thing he owned. I had to look away. At the field. At anything. Then I asked the question that mattered. If the court calls you, will you tell them that? He sat for a while. Then nodded once. For Henry, he said, I'll come. Word travels fast in a small county. Too fast. Someone saw me leave town with a folder. Someone saw me come back lighter in the shoulders. By the time I got home, my father knew I had found something. He did not call me. He did something worse. That Sunday, he gathered the family at the home place again. Cousins. Aunts. Denise's people. All of them. And when I walked in, he was already in the middle of a story. Telling the room I had cooked up a fake will. That I was trying to cheat my own grieving brother out of his inheritance. That I had always been jealous. That I had found some old woman willing to lie for me. He said it to people who had known me since I was 9 years old behind that counter. And the worst part was watching some of them believe him. Because he said it with such wounded confidence. I felt heat climb my neck. But under that heat, strangely, I heard the brass bell. The old safe sound of home. Only now that same room felt like a place I had to defend myself in. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the forged deed onto the kitchen table. But then I would have just been one shouting woman against one smooth man. And shouting women lose those rooms. So I let the kitchen go quiet. Picked up my purse. And said the only thing worth saying. Then you won't mind the court taking a look. His face flickered. Just once. I walked out. And this time, that screen door did not sound like a lock. It sounded like a starting gun. Monday morning, I stopped being only a daughter. And became a petitioner. I had handled enough of these cases to do the groundwork myself. But I was not foolish enough to represent myself in the fight of my life. So I hired a sharp probate lawyer named Elena Cruz. She listened. Read every page. Then looked at me and said, we file now. We filed 2 things at once. A petition to admit a lost or destroyed will to probate. And a motion to compel a full accounting and inventory from Victor as administrator. The will petition attached the conformed copy. Martha's notary page. Frank's sworn statement. The accounting motion did something more important. It took Simon Creed's favorite trick away from him. He could ignore my letters forever. He could not ignore a court order. Judge Mercer heard the motion in a short hearing. No nonsense. No patience for games. She granted it and gave my father 21 days to produce a full accounting. I watched Simon's jaw tighten when she said it. He had built the whole plan around keeping the numbers in the dark. And now the light was on. Outside the courthouse, Elena told me to brace myself. They'll fight the will hard, she said. That presumption is real. But the accounting? That's where men like your father trip. They can hide a will. It's harder to hide where the money went when a judge is looking. That night, I drove home with the first clean feeling I had felt in weeks. Not victory. Nothing close. But for the first time, my father was going to have to write something down. And nobody alive read his math better than I did. The accounting arrived on the 21st day. A thick stack of pages. And Simon clearly thought weight would hide the rot. He forgot who would be reading it. I cleared my table. Made coffee. Opened the pages the way Grandpa opened the store every morning. Slow. Certain. It took me one evening to find the first body. After that, they kept appearing. There was Creekline Holdings again. When I pulled its registration, the paper trail led straight back to my father. Victor had sold estate land to a company he controlled. To himself. 2 parcels. For about a third of fair value. He had taken land worth hundreds of thousands and moved it into his own pocket for the price of a used truck. That is not a gray area. That is textbook self-dealing. The one thing an administrator most absolutely cannot do. But it did not stop there. He had charged the estate bloated administrative fees. He had paid Simon's firm from estate money for work that protected Victor personally. He had let the store's insurance lapse to save cash, risking the whole asset. Every page held another little theft dressed up as management. I sat back and looked at what the numbers were really saying. It was bigger than I feared. He was not just trying to cut me out. He was looting Grandpa's whole life. And calling it grief. Then I understood the porch. Mason's the next heir had never been a real plan. It was a costume. If my father had stood on that porch and said the land was coming to him, even his supporters would have flinched. So he hid behind my brother. A broke young father with a baby. Nobody wants to be the villain who questions helping a struggling son. Mason was never the heir. He was the shield. The land was meant for Creekline Holdings. And Creekline Holdings was Victor. I did not feel rage. Not then. Rage is loud. This was quieter. Colder. The clean certainty of a column finally balancing. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and for every violation wrote the entry, the statute, and the page number. I built the exhibit line by line. The one that would walk into Judge Mercer's courtroom and speak for itself. Mason found me before I found him. He came after dark. No pie this time. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept since the porch. He sat on the step outside my apartment instead of coming in. Like he did not think he had earned indoors. I signed things, Nora, he said to the parking lot. I didn't read them. Dad said it was procedure. He told me I was the heir. Said you were taken care of. I was tired and broke and I just signed. I let him talk. I had been ready to count him among the guilty. And there he was. Another person our father had walked through a stack of paper in the dark. The debt. The baby. The fear. Victor knew exactly where the cracks were. But I had promised myself something. I would not go soft just because the wound made sense. So I brought the accounting outside. Set it on the step between us under the porch light. Showed him Creekline. Showed him the bargain price on Grandpa's best land. Showed him the lapsed insurance on the store where we both grew up. I watched my brother read what our father had actually done. Not to me. To Henry Hale. When he looked up, his face had fallen apart. If that's real, he said, voice cracking, then what does that make me? I did not rush to comfort him. Some questions need air. I gave him the only mercy I had. It makes you someone who got used, Mason. Same as me. The difference now is what you do once you know. Then I left him sitting there with the papers. And let the night do the rest. My father's side did not quit. They got sharper. Meaner. Simon filed a motion to dismiss the will petition. And he aimed it straight at my weakest point. The presumption of revocation. His argument was clean and cruel. No original will existed. Under the law, a missing original that was once in the testator's control is presumed destroyed by that person. A photocopy and 2 old witnesses might prove what the will said. But they could not prove Grandpa had not changed his mind and torn it up himself. Without proof somebody else destroyed it, the petition should fail. The estate should pass as if no will existed. Elena did not sugarcoat it. He's right about the law, she told me. Judges take that presumption seriously. Right now we have motive. We have bad acts. We do not have access. We cannot yet put the original will in your father's hands. I drove home gripping the wheel. I needed one hard fact. One physical link. Where would Grandpa have kept the original? Not at the lawyer's office. No. He would have kept it close. At the home place. In the one spot he trusted. The second I thought it, I knew exactly where. The old floor safe in the office off the kitchen. I had seen him spin that dial 100 times. The safe held important papers. Deeds. His army discharge. Grandma's photo. If the original will stayed anywhere, that was it. But the safe was at the home place. And the home place was my father's fortress. I could not get to the safe. But I could get to history. Small towns keep receipts whether they mean to or not. So I started calling locksmiths. There are not many in our county. The third one remembered the job right away. Because you do not forget being called to a grieving family's house to drill out an old safe. The customer name on the work order was Victor Hale. The date nearly stopped my heart. 11 days after Grandpa's funeral. 11 days. Long enough to grieve. Long enough to open the safe. Long enough to find something inside. Long enough to decide he did not like it. Then change the lock so nobody could ever check what had once been there. I sat very still in my kitchen. And let every piece click into place. Grandpa didn't lose the will, I said to the empty room. Dad opened the safe, took it, and changed the lock behind him. I called Elena at 9 that night. She actually laughed. The tired, fierce laugh of somebody who had just been handed the missing brick. That, she said, is access. That brings the wall down. We had 3 weeks until the hearing. And I worked those weeks the way Grandpa worked harvest. Every daylight hour. And most of the dark. We subpoenaed the locksmith's work order. Dated. Signed. We secured Martha's original notary journal and sworn testimony. We kept in close touch with Frank and made sure he could travel. Elena shaped the accounting into a clean exhibit of self-dealing. I tabbed each page. Each statute. Each land transfer. And at the center of it all sat the conformed copy of the will. The thing Grandpa signed while I waited in the car. I practiced too. Not arguments. Elena would handle those. I practiced staying calm. Because I knew my father. And I knew what he does when his back touches a wall. He gets louder. The worst thing I could do was match him. Martha stopped by the night before the hearing with a tin of cookies and the best advice anyone gave me. Say it plain, she told me. Don't decorate it. Let the paper shout so you don't have to. I wrote that at the top of my notes. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. By then, half the county had heard about it. So the courthouse was not quiet. Aunts. Cousins. Old store hands who had known Grandpa for 50 years. People came because they loved Henry Hale. And because small towns never ignore a family war. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old radiators. My father stood near the courtroom door in his good suit. Simon Creed beside him. Smooth. Pressed. Certain. Victor still carried himself like a man who believed he ran every room he entered. When he saw me, he made sure the hallway could hear. Still chasing your fairy tale, he said. Then louder, you won't get a single cent. The exact porch words. He loved that line so much he could not stop using it. Heads turned. He smiled. Satisfied. I didn't answer. Under one arm, I carried a thin folder. In my other hand, I carried Grandpa's green ledger. Not as evidence. As ballast. As something of his to hold. Mason stood off to the side. Apart from our father for the first time I could remember. Pale. Unsteady. Like a man standing in a doorway he had not chosen. Elena touched my elbow. Ready? I looked at my father. At the cousins he had worked over. At my brother trying to decide what kind of man he was. And I felt it. That calm I had practiced. Not numbness. Certainty. The certainty of a column checked twice. Ready, I said. We went in. The bailiff called the case. Judge Mercer took the bench. Looked over the crowded gallery without surprise. Then said the words I had been driving toward for 2 months. Let's hear from the petitioner's witnesses. Martha Keene went first. And the whole room learned in about 4 minutes why you do not underestimate a woman who has notarized 1,000 documents. She sat in her sensible coat. Back straight. Hands folded. Elena walked her through it gently. 31 years as Leonard Pike's secretary and notary. The day Henry Hale came in to sign his will. Martha produced her original notary journal. A worn book. Real. Ordinary. Perfect. She read the entry aloud. The date. The document. Last will and testament. Henry Hale's signature. Her stamp. Her seal logged right there between a property deed and a power of attorney from the same afternoon. It was not dramatic. That is what made it strong. This was not memory dressed up as truth. It was a business record made the day it happened.